Alright, so right now we're going to look at variables part 2. The first thing we're going to go over is naming, declaring, assigning, and initializing variables. So the first thing we're going to talk about is naming variables. And there are 4 rules that I want you to follow while we name variables. Alright? So variable names can be of any length, so you don't have to worry about how long or short they are. Just one good thing to keep in mind is to make sure the variable name relates to what the variable's function is. That's what I like to do. And the next one is that a variable name should consist of only letters, numbers, or underscores. All right? And the third one is that variable name should start with a lowercase letter. So whenever you start a variable name, make sure it starts with some sort of a lowercase letter. All right? And then each word beyond the first word in a variable name should begin with an uppercase first letter, and I'll just show you what I'm talking about. All right, so the general format for creating a variable is going to be data type, and then variable name. All right, and then we're gonna talk about what comes after that. All right, so now let's say I want to create a boolean. All right, I want to create a boolean, and then I want to say let's say I have a maze, right? And I want to see if there's a wall. Okay? So I'm going to say boolean is wall underscore. Now that I notice how I started off with a lowercase letter I and then followed the following word wall started with an uppercase W, right? And then I'm going to use an underscore. And after an underscore, I don't necessarily have to capitalize the word, so I can just say is wall at capital P point capital X. All right, so that's how I name variables. Obviously, I can use numbers. So another example of me using a number to declare a variable. So int, I always have to start with a lowercase letter. So I can say A5 like that underscore 679. All right, equals 0. All right, so that's how we name variables. So you just want to remember these 4 basic rules of thumb, all right, when you name variables. Okay, so declaring variables. So declaring variables is simply creating a variable, and it usually follows the format of whatever your data type is. And remember, when we talked about data types, we have 2 types. We have primitives, objects, and we have int, double, boolean, and char within primitives, and string within objects. So we have our data type and your variable name. All right, so that's how we declare a single variable with the same data type. All right, so we have data type, variable name. So an example of this would be int x, simply like that. All right, so then what if we want to declare multiple variables that are within the same data type? So all we have to do is we have to say data type, variable 1, variable 2, and so on and so forth. All right, and then semicolon. All right, don't forget the semicolon. And that's how we create a series of declarations for the same variable. All right, so an example of this would be double x, y, z. All right, so that's how we simply declare a variable. That's when we create a variable. Now let's talk about assigning variables. Now assigning or assignment of a variable simply means when we give an already declared variable a name. A value. We give an already declared variable a value, not a name, a value, right? So also one thing to note that I forgot to say earlier is that declaring a variable only happens one time. We only declare a variable one time. We never declare it more than once. So here's what I'm talking about. So basically we have our data type, variable name. So if you notice this is declaring a variable. This is where we declare a variable. Now, if we want to assign a value, we simply give that variable a value. So we're going to say variable name is equal to some sort of value. And that is called assigning variables. Okay? So now here, let's look at an example. So let's say I have int x like I did before. I have int x. I declared my variable. But now I want to assign that variable x, I want to assign it a value. So then I'll go along my code and then I'm going to say x is equal to 10. Now notice how I said int x and then x is equal to 10. I did not add int before the x. And I do that because in Java, we only have to declare a variable. And by declare, I mean we only have to declare a variable one time. We cannot say int x is equal to 10 once int x has already been established, okay? So that will actually bring up an error, and we do not want that to happen. So that's how we do it. Just declare it once, and then if you have already declared it, assign the value to the variable. All right. So now let's look at initializing variables. So initializing is where we give the first value, or the first time, or the initial time we give a value to a variable. All right. So the format is simply like this. We have our data type, our variable name, which is equal to some value, semicolon. So if you notice, this is kind of like declaring plus assigning in one step. All right. So here, what we're gonna do is, let's say we have an int value, and its name is x. We call it x, all right, int x. And we want to set it to 0 the first time. So we're going to put it 0, and bam, that's how you initialize a variable. We say the data type, the variable name, is equal to some initial value, all right? So that's how we initialize variable. What if we want to initialize more than one sort of variable under the same data type? Well, remember how we declared a variable? How we declared a variable, or multiple variables in a series? We used data type, variable 1, or variable name number 1, variable name number 2, so on and so forth. We're going to do the same thing, and then we're going to set all of that equal to a value. So all we have to do, so this is for a series of initialization. So we have our data type, int, and then we want to set x, y, and z, and we set all of that to 0. All of those are equal to 0. All right, so that's how we initialize, assign, and declare variables. Now moving on to possible loss of precision. So this is a common type of error that occurs when you try to store a more complex type or complicated type into a rather simpler type. So here's what I mean. So let's say we have an int value. We have an int counter. Int counter, and we set it equal to 3.9. Do you think this will work? Well, this will actually not work, because if we remember, our primitive data type int holds only whole numbers. But 3.9 is not a whole number, it's a decimal value. So technically, a double stores this, not an int. So this way, this will bring up an error. Most probably a type mismatch. All right, so the way we can fix this, and we can say double counter is equal to 3.9. And that will be happy. The compiler will be happy. But if we also want to say double counter, I'll just put double counter 2, is equal to 7, the compiler will be happy again, even though 7 is a whole number, because doubles, they are in the realm of whole numbers, right? So that's why doubles can hold whole numbers and decimal numbers. So, however, if we do try to do something like system.out dot println counter 2, it's not going to print out 7. So most of you be saying, oh yeah, that's going to print out 7. No, it's not going to print out 7. It's actually going to print out 7.0.